For the record, we do have a quorum established, and there is no public present or public comment. We're now ready to take a vote or look for a motion for the approval of minutes.
So moved.
Second. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, that passes. We will move on. It looks like we have no items under a consent agenda, so we'll move right on to general business. And I believe, Dave, you're going to present on the West Route 66 master plan today?
That's correct.
Okay.
So would like to confirm that everybody can see the PowerPoint, MetroPlan Greater Flagstaff.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so this item is the West Route 66 Master Plan, also known as the Operational Assessment. That was a decision reached last month. Going to give you some context. What we hope at the end of this meeting is to reach consensus on and confirm consensus on the project purpose and the task and objectives going forward. So for context, here we have an aerial image of the corridor. You can see Milton Road on the right and I-40 on the left. The area where 419 tax initiative funds can be applied, and then the area that is county maintained. Here's a land use map showing, I believe this is based on zoning type. So this is permitted land use. I think by and large it is the land uses that exist follow this. You can see commercial concentrations at the east end and some industrial at the west end, with large swaths of residential in between. In terms of ownership, you can see there's quite a few large parcels remaining of vacant private development. A small area centrally located that is public. I believe that would probably be Forest Service property. The right-of-way in this area is typically 120 to 125 feet. And from the Milton corridor before we get there. So the earlier slide, we saw, the area where 419 funds could be spent. That's one of the objectives here, is to identify a 419 project. Here we see Route 8. Currently, there's a loop that goes around Thompson University and Woodlands Village. That loop would be dropped and extended out to Woody Mountain to Kilty Lane. This is in the Flagstaff in Motion plan, the 5-year plan by Mountain Line. Something that's been on their to-do list for a while. And so another objective here is to help plan this route extension, focusing more on where the stops may be and how crossings might be implemented to serve those stops. Here we see, I'm going to pause here a second. Mandy, do I have the current presentation? Because I know you would put some cross sections in there, and I don't see them.
Yes, you should. Perhaps they accidentally got moved.
Okay, well, we'll continue on. I will back up and just verbally describe. So in this 120 to 125 foot cross section would accommodate many of the larger scale cross sections that we looked at for the Milton Corridor Master Plan. So, that to say that there's quite a bit of room to work with. Here. So here we get into the project purpose and project description. I'm going to go ahead and read the purpose statement out loud. Let you guys read along, and then we'll discuss this a bit. So the purpose of the West Route 66 operation assessment is to identify and prioritize multimodal transportation projects for the corridor as a whole. However, special emphasis will be placed on identifying projects and funding partnerships for voter-approved 419 tax initiative funds that have been specifically allocated to West Route 66 from Milton Road to Flagstaff Ranch Road. In addition, this plan will also support Mountain Land's planned extension of Route 8 along West Route 66 as identified Flagstaff in Motion 5-year plan, by providing guidance on future bus stop locations, potential bus stop design options, and route design. So I'm going to pause there. We're not looking for formal action today, but we do want to get a sense that we're heading in the right direction with this scope statement. There's Ann Dunno. So Ann has been online and arrived. Greetings, Ann. How are you doing?
Thank you. Sorry
Good.
about that.
Thank you for getting here. So, I'll ask the question this way. Does anybody have any issues with the statement as written? Okay, I'm not hearing any issues. Let me ask this question. If we were to achieve this purpose, would you be pleased with result? Anybody disagree with that statement? I'll just put it, I'll say, when we're done, if we achieve this purpose, everybody will be happy. Anybody want to object to that statement? So, if silence is assent, we're going to make sure that you're comfortable with your silence. So then you can see the project description. We'll be doing a 2045 horizon year, really looking to achieve implementation in accordance with ADOT policy. This is ADOT jurisdictional road. We understand that. We will be working to at least compare and contrast the city standards, so we can all understand the differences there. So in the scope statement, there's these goals. So we're going to talk about this goal 1, achieving a 15% design level. We'll talk about that here in a moment. Bus stop locations, as we've mentioned, with good pedestrian access. Analyses to look if we get a good level of service. Goal 4, best practices for outcome-oriented evaluation criteria. So that's really going to be kind of the crux, is what are we evaluating against in terms of performance, not just compliance with standards. Prioritization of projects, goal 5, implementability, is that a word? I say that? I can't say it, but I think it's a word. So really looking for projects that are code compliant, projects that are within budget, primarily within right of way, and people can take action on. And then funding and other resources that can be brought to bear for eligibility. Some of the things we won't be doing, I just mentioned right of way. Looks like there's a fair amount of right of way available, but I don't know that all projects will fit within that. I know one of the things this corridor, I think, lends itself to is alternate design intersections like roundabouts. They may have footprints larger than the current right of way can accommodate. and we'll bring those to your attention if those are the preferred alternative or most effective solution. Decide whether those levels of right-of-way implication are acceptable. The Milton Corridor Master Plan has set, a lot of work went behind that, set things in motion. And between it and the La Plaza Vieja neighborhood plan, this concept of a Clay Avenue extension, which would be, taking it further to the west and then tying into Kaibab, has agreed to be off the table in terms of network analysis and such. We'll be using current plans that are in place, Regional Plan 2030. But that said, we will try to coordinate. This is on the land use side of things, but we will try to coordinate with the regional plan update for some of our sensitivity analysis scenarios. In terms of impacts that might apply to developers, we'll be working closely with the city and ADOT primarily to make sure that those impacts would be within the normal course of development process. So nothing, out of the ordinary there if we can. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, working, because it's an ADOT highway, working on ADOT standards. We won't be doing urban design. So we'll just be looking primarily at land use as inputs to the models, but and then standards for setbacks and such, but not trying to do any landscaping or building forward implications, staying out of that. And then really trying to stay at 15% design, which is that kind of preliminary engineering. So we're not really looking at doing any engineering, so that would be excluded. So any questions on either the goals or these exclusions? Okay. The budget is going to be a primary constraint, both probably clear the planning process itself, but also as we look at different projects and scales of projects, and then really staying within the ADOT standards and policies. We know that in the Milton Corridor process, the friction, I guess I'll say, between ADOT policies and city policies was difficult to resolve at times. I think the ADOT is sticking with ADOT policies and achieving the best outcome using those will certainly streamline the communications of the process. So at the end of the day, we're going to take this through our process. We will form a project advisory group. They'll inform staff, and we'll work up through the TAC and the management committee and executive board. So MetroPlan will adopt this plan. If we come up with the secret sauce that allows us to create a plan that either the city or ADOT could adopt, I think we'll be keeping our eyes open for that. But right now, the anticipation is that's not likely to happen, but to the degree that we can follow ADOT protocol, comply with ADOT standards, that the city is on board with those outcomes in terms of, hey, if we were to do a TIA, we'd all arrive at these conclusions. We will be happy with that. But again, here, if we can fashion these in a way that it becomes policy for either the city or the state, that would be great. So here's a little diagram. I'm sorry, I should pause there, see if there's any questions about that. Yeah, Ann.
Maybe not a question, but observation. And
Yeah.
I just want to say I really appreciate the process and the scope statement description. It was really clear on the deliverables, the purpose. But I think from how this has been playing out, and I totally concur with the
Yeah.
operational assessment, and this is the direction we're going, but I do think it would be really, suggestion for MetroPlan to consider in conversation with your board is, we had a great joint meeting with that group, and it was visionary, it was pies the sky, and everyone was putting down ideas, and there
Yeah.
was quite a few people in that room that aren't transportation planners, and aren't, the nuance of what we're doing here is
Yeah.
starting to get into the weeds of non-tech, out of that world. And so I think it's hopefully clear that the constraint that now we've gone, the decision to go from pies the sky, let's vision this. And then over on the side, MetroPlan is having a route study transfer, exploration work plan item that you're working on, is my understanding, which, would obviously potentially open up opportunities to that vision. At this time, that I think it would be helpful to really be clear that my understanding of how TAC has looked at this, and others,
Yeah.
please chime in, is there's so much growth, the speed it's happening. We need to get improvements out there. And we've come, I hate to say it, but we've decided that we're going to settle essentially for, we've defined that and accepted that as a constraint, that ADOT
Yeah.
policies, 4 foot, 6 foot sidewalk, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But, and all the outcomes that you said, you're endeavoring to get the multimodal, but it's going to comply. We're not going to have landscaping. We're not going to have, some of the other things that were drawn on some of those vision boards in that meeting. I think that would be really helpful. I mean, I think this is going to be
Yeah.
a great deliverable for transportation, for entities to use this, to get grant funding, to build a case for a project, to get, to deliver a project, to set out, if they go, and if a city decides to do a project, you've got your scope, you can go and start your procurement, or whoever is delivering it, right? There'll be a plan, which will be great. But I think that's a really key piece of this, this decision to, which again, I agree, let's do this assessment. We've got a great
Yeah.
deliverable here, but I think that's a real big distinction from that meeting that we had with the board.
So we need to manage expectations.
Manage expectations is my suggestion.
That's good.
And help them explain why. And I mean, everybody's, the transparency. I mean, we've gone through the Milton process, and we,
Mhm.
I think everyone's on the same page. We all want the same thing, right? We want to want improvements for our community. So I just think would be a really good potential conversation to have with the board, to consider, just so they understand. Because this is definitely starting to go down the technical planning outside of that.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So, yes.
I have a question. I'm gonna
So
change
you're the
subjects.
chair. I don't think you need to raise your hand.
Okay, I didn't know. That's what I'm polite. I have a question just on the adoption process. I don't know that I've been here when MetroPlan has adopted a plan.
Yeah.
Can you run it through it? And because it's important for me, because when you talk about like looking for opportunities, if I understand how this process works,
Mhm.
then that helps me look at how can we tie it into other approval processes or
Right.
ways that just even have the conversation about how do we
Yeah.
adopt it at a different level.
So, I mean, it's, we just recently adopted the RTP, Regional Transportation Plan.
Yeah.
And that plan has a specific public outreach policy, but, you go through the technical advisory committee, they make a recommendation, you put it out for public comment period. It goes to the board, you respond to comments, and it goes to the board. And we're likely going to do something similar with this. So, and then at the end of the day, and I think this is something we'll need to be conscious of, or need to speak to. This actually, aside from some plans that aren't, are more kind of programmatic and not so capital oriented. What are the implications of this plan if ADOT wants to come up, here's a project that doesn't comply with this plan? I think we need to, I don't know that we fully understand what that means. It's like, improvements to West Route 66 are certainly in the regional transportation plan. Does this become an addendum to that? some things we need to understand.
Thanks.
So I will make a note of that. So on this diagram here, this is from ADOT's performance-based practical design. This the dashed lines in there are kind of the area in which we'll be working. So you can see we'll be initiating the project. We're kind of going through that process now, working on the scoping of the project, and we'll go into a little more detail on that here shortly. And then going through the alternatives of development and evaluation and coming up with a recommended alternative. But we really won't be getting into design per se. We'll try to identify issues related to design. We know that at one point on this corridor, it drops off pretty hard to the south into a manufactured home community, and there may be some restrictions there. We'll do our best to identify those and maybe even some order of magnitude, but we're not going to be doing a lot of line drawings and stuff to really quantify that in great detail. Oh, here they are, the cross sections.
I just try to join because I can't actually see the screen. It's telling me that somebody will let me in. I don't know if it's Mandy or Ty.
It's probably.
I just let you in. It might take it a minute to update.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right. So here's some of those cross sections. You can see 100 feet, a couple alternatives that fit within 100 feet, and there's one that fits within 125 feet. I don't know that we'll be looking at three lanes in each direction, but if this is just to show order of magnitude as to how much sugar we can fit in this 125-foot bag. Just to give you some context there. So here's our objectives in more detail. So we're looking to reach consensus on these objectives, starting to define our agency roles in our stakeholder outreach, really engaging stakeholders and increasing awareness. To access
Thanks
the
for,
information. And making sure people have the information they need to weigh in. And we're really looking, because we'd like this to be implementable, we'd really like TAC members to be sure they're going back to their respective agencies, talking through this, and bringing that information back where there's opportunities or issues that we need to be aware of. We will be doing existing and future conditions analysis, and I'll speak to that briefly here in a moment. And then really setting that baseline information. So you saw some of the existing conditions, type of information we're gathering. We'll be doing baseline and future conditions for many of those types of inputs. Developing alternatives and evaluating those. The criteria development is going to be a big part of that. I think we learned a lot through the Milton Corridor Master Plan, and there's been a lot on the equity and sustainability front as a result of the IIJA that's come online. We'll be bringing that to bear in this process as well. And then we'll arrive at a recommended alternative. And that alternative, as we said before, will address, here's some candidate projects for 419 funds. Here's some recommendations for Route 8 and the transit plan. And then wrapping up with the drafts and the final reports. So this is kind of an expansion on those goals. Oops, I'm going into deliverable. I mean to go back. So any questions? Do you feel like the objectives here are in line with those goals? The overall scope statement and the goals? Are we heading down the path together? Yes.
Actually, I'm
Yeah.
connecting different dots here. That one deliverable or task for public outreach,
Yep.
related to my last comment actually is because, this is a constrained project
Mhm.
with the constraints of the ADOT policies and standards. One consideration I think that's going to be really important about that public outreach is looking at making sure what you bring to the public the first time, it's being very transparent with the public that this is not, hey, I want landscaping and I want, all these other things that we know we're not going to be able to, don't even open that up for that, like approaching it very this is within the world, this is what's allowed, like running through those, getting that on paper, so to speak, and getting that sign off by ADOT, like, okay, now we're ready to, there's some flexibility with some of their ADOT standards, but living within that world, I think is going to be really important because we're going to potentially disappoint a lot of public by going out with some sort of tabula rasa opportunity. Here, what do you want to do, public? That's not what that exercise. So I think that's got to be a real good strategy behind that.
Again, an excellent
Yeah.
point.
And knowing where you're at in that public input outreach spectrum, because you're not asking for open, you're asking like, we're developing an alternative that we know our ADOT partner will,
Yeah.
some range might accept. And now we'll go out to the public and say, what do you want, public? Here's your opportunity within that constraint. So I think
Yeah.
that's a fair,
Yeah,
I just think it's gonna,
Yeah.
It just doesn't behoove, there's so many of us going out for public feedback and when people give a lot of input and they feel like, well, my input, whatever happened to mine, but why did you bother asking me if we can't have landscaping? If we can't have separated bike lanes or whatever it is. So I feel like that will save a lot of time too and relationships with the public, trust. So I just think that's important.
Almost like a clear fact sheet of this is what this plan can do.
Yes.
That's where we do have room to
Yes.
move, and this is off the table. And probably a good explanation is why.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and I think you can explain, I mean, it's pretty straightforward why. I mean, it's, you can roll that up, take the technical aspect out of it. And
Yeah.
so I think that it would make the process easier for the project.
Certainly in terms of the type of input that we solicit and receive and what we need to manage. Michelle, I guess I would look to you. Maybe not an answer today, but the regional plan is ongoing. By dialing this back, I think it does help us differentiate pretty clearly from the regional plan. But there may be an opportunity for when the visionary stuff comes up, we can just say, let me introduce you to Michelle.
Or Sarah Deck.
Or Sarah Deck.
I'm
But
punting.
help redirect to the regional plan process.
Yeah, but I think even within, we have to be really clear what the parameters are because I don't want to build up expectations
Mhm.
that, okay, we can't get it here, but if you voice it loud enough, you're gonna get it
Okay.
here. But I appreciate, I'm not saying let's not do that. I'm just saying, again, with the expectation management, and I think that's a conversation I'd like to have with Sarah. How do we do that? We have a lot of planning efforts going on. I think that's a conversation we probably have to have with a lot of different things because we have, the Downtown Business Association is doing the downtown vision. We're going to be starting the JWP corridor. We're doing this code analysis. There's so much, and
Yeah.
I think that's probably part of a larger communication of where do you put in what and
Mhm.
where can you expect to see these things be implemented? Because I think that gets challenging because typically, like, you would see it in a regional plan, and that would be informing something like this is a
Yeah.
corridor assessment, and that's
Yeah.
not really what's happening.
Yeah.
I mean,
And the
pretty much.
city doesn't own it. So I
Exactly.
mean, that's the
Well,
punchline, right?
And
That,
So-
and you would always be planning and never
Exactly.
building because
And I
there's
think-
always a plan coming up.
Exactly.
And I think, that's, so I think that.
Yeah. I see Myrna has her hand up as well.
Vernon?
Yes, hi. So what might help with um, uh, drawing that line of not, going, not crossing, I guess, is reminding. I mean, this is sensitive, so I was thinking that reminding the public that, you know, the funding source that is basically funding this project will only allow uh, so much development, and that's spelled out, you know, by federal policy, and also, and like for instance, when you were saying 15% design, well, what is considered 15% design? I might be able to help out with that because ADOT does actually have a level of what is considered 15% design. So, I mean, I don't. I'm sorry.
That would be great.
Okay. Yeah, so that might help with that aspect of it, determining where that line is.
Thank you. Scribbling some notes here. Okay. So in terms of deliverables, now see a number listed here. A lot of stuff under project initiation, all the agendas, meeting minutes. We'll be looking at managing stakeholders, again, websites, social media. Basis of design under existing and future conditions, really setting that out, I think will help set the parameters that we were working under pretty clearly. That technical memos on existing and future conditions, and then making sure we have a good process for accepting the criteria. We're going to be doing this operational assessment for the baseline, what are current conditions, using the criteria that are developed. And then as we do, then applying those in this alternative development and evaluation, really be coming back to kind of the baseline and the future business as usual situations in both of those. And we're hoping, and actually, Michelle, I was thinking I would have heard for weeks now from Cascadia on the business as usual scenario. And having something like plug and play ready for the regional transportation model. Haven't heard anything, but because we were expecting that and because we still have some time ahead of us, thinking that we can really use that business as usual scenario that they've developed, and then we have a really clear link into the regional plan. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about how we go about developing alternatives and evaluating them. And the idea on, we're going to have land use and transportation. On the land use side, this would be comparable in a traffic impact analysis to the site plan. What's going into the site? Well, what's going into this corridor? We're going to look at several scenarios for sensitivity analysis. And, it might be, we're going to work those out with the project advisory group and the TAC, but just do a 20% increase in uniformly across the corridor. Let's shift growth into kind of what we did for the RTP. Let's shift growth heavily into some activity centers. And the idea at the end of the day will be to find a solution that's fairly resilient across multiple futures. Not necessarily the one that blows the doors off a given scenario, but that's resilient. This might be a little bit different than a typical TIA process, but I think it's gives us a more robust product. So to get there, we'll have these multiple land use scenarios, And we'll start with some broad transportation scenarios. I mean, things we've done in the past. Let's just widen the road pretty aggressively. Let's try increasing connectivity aggressively. Let's try throwing ped bike and transit at it aggressively. And really trying to create a fairly diverse set.
You can't do connectivity, right? Isn't that a constraint on this project?
I don't think so.
I thought you couldn't consider new connections to the West Route 66.
No, that was just that one Clay Avenue extension.
Oh, okay.
You know, the neighborhood plan is already kind of made a
Okay,
commitment.
Gotcha.
We're not coming through the neighborhood with this.
So that's why that's not.
So that's why that's
Okay,
being
okay,
included.
thank you.
Other connections can be.
Okay, thank you for that
Example.
clarification, because I was
Asking it, because
thinking,
Yes.
I was thinking
Yeah.
about a different large development that.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of keep throwing things back in the hopper, try to, set a pretty wide range, do some evaluation against those. It's like, okay, now we've kind of got the guardrails set. Let's throw some more variations in. So it's not necessarily a strict funnel because there's going to be iteration. And we have two tools available to us for modeling. We've got this older version of the model that's kind of a sketch modeling tool, can be pretty quick. So we think we can run through those fairly fast. We'll have a high level set of criteria to evaluate those and then narrow that down. And then we'll get into, let me back up. And so that helps us with some of the, the trip generation that we would see in a TIA, helps us with, that kind of base conditions. We'll be doing a 2045, as I mentioned, so the same, present conditions, future conditions. And then we're going to get to a point before we start getting into the use of the new model in more detail, where we hope to make use of it's called Safety Performance for Intersection Control Evaluation Tool, SPICE. It's an
Doesn't
FHW.
sound spicy.
It's an FHW. Yeah, really. It's an FHWA developed tool, and we can take the outputs from the model and apply it to this tool for different intersections. And it can help assess, a roundabout would be good. Indirect left turn intersection would be good. Standard intersection would be good. And gives you a safety evaluation. So this then helps define what we then take it to the higher detail model where we can model those kinds of intersections more accurately. So now we're in some ways getting down to the mitigation level that a TIA would say. How do we solve the problem? Where's our level of service deficiencies? I'm really starting to get into those in details, and we expect a couple of rounds against a fewer set of scenarios, combinations of land use and transportation at that detail level. And then ultimately, we're working out the details with NAU, anticipate doing some micro simulation and intersection analysis for maybe a couple of those alternatives, and then a timing plan for the last recommended alternative. So we think we can, again, mimic or emulate that TIA process fairly well, evaluate things at more of a corridor level, where a TIA, I think, is typically, and Stephanie, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, TIAs tend to look at intersection by intersection and not necessarily at a corridor that's being impacted. And, I think the assumption is that we get the intersections right, the corridor, fine. And just because of the nature of the work we're doing, we'll be introducing corridor measures like travel time across the corridor and such. So before I go further, I should acknowledge, had a great conversation with Stephanie and Ryan Wolf from ADOT to see where, we can try to follow this TIA process to some degree. And the idea being, if we follow it, it's something that, the results of will then be more agreeable or predictable or expected by all parties involved. So following that process, we get down to a recommended alternative and go through these draft reports. So going to pause there and see if there are questions about the process we hope to follow or intend to follow. I see Ann looking around.
Kind of looking over to the
Yeah.
engineering side over here.
Yeah, so seeing that you're looking around, let me add this. I mean, one of the things that we heard yesterday talking with Ryan and Stephanie that, there's room for improvement in both ADOT and city processes on looking at transit, pedestrian and bikes. And so maybe there's an opportunity here to look at these new tools that we have available. For doing that, we will be bringing in BMT analysis into this. And again, maybe an opportunity. I know the city is looking into this. Maybe there's an opportunity. How could we use BMT to assess possible projects and possible development patterns and what those mean? So one of the things I know I've mentioned in the past that we do have available in the new model is the ability to actually assign, show bike paths and assign bikes to those paths, create transit routes and stops and show activity levels. So we'll get to a level of detail that hasn't been available in past modeling and TIA processes. And so we can hopefully learn a lot through this process.
For the model and the transit, can you use like MetroPlan's ridership numbers, like
Yep.
that's how you kind of
Yeah.
gauge it? Can
We
put it in there?
calibrate the model to those ridership numbers. In an earlier calibration, we actually looked at, they changed route 2 from 30-minute to 20-minute frequency, and we saw % increase in field in ridership, and the model did a pretty good job of replicating that. So, as we get down to finer and finer slices, we might want to look at kind of % change as much more so than perhaps, absolute numbers, because we're talking about millions of trips a day and trying to figure out, the 5 people are going to use the most remote bus that gets, you don't want to hang your hat on this too heavy, but you can see changes as a result of changes in, frequency or
What I'm hearing,
pedestrian
you're gonna add an element of counting people throughput,
Yeah.
not just cars, but finding ways to find a credible way to count people on bikes and peds and transit
Right.
slash way.
And you're doing the bicycle counts coming up, right? Is that
Right.
like-
Which is a good reminder. I gotta write that on my to-do list. I gotta get after your crew over there to get me those locations because they're gonna be out in the field here before too long. So,
Can I ask a
Yeah.
follow-up question about the analysis part? This is the classic one that has been, the bus stop pull-out warrant process and head crossing warrant process. Will that, which is pretty much a standard ADOT step. I don't know where in that wheel we're at with that. Those 2 key elements have always been traditionally
Yeah.
the crux of decisions around why, why a pull out, why not a pull out, or why can't we have a crossing, or, those kinds of issues. Are we going to actually get through the pedestrian warrant process with this deliverable?
I would be surprised because we're not getting into that kind of
Okay.
design. However,
Even though you'll have all this data?
we should
around
be able to
at the high
make
level?
some projections. So for the downtown mile raise grant, we were able to put in the connections for the flow nut at the Rio. and show a shift off of crossings at San Francisco. So they say, oh, we have fewer crossings of the railroad tracks, fewer accidents, so on. So we can look at that level of demand and can, based on that, I think, make strong recommendations for where crossings should be. I think where we ended up with the Milton Corridor Master Plan is probably where we'll end up here, where it's like, yeah, these are great ideas. We all agree that these are the locations. And when they meet warrants, good to go.
So we won't have enough data around potential number of cars as you're, I mean, I heard you're gonna have signal timing potentially or
Yeah.
timing of intersections. So it seems like you'd be able to sort of predict the number of cars and I don't know. It's a question, because I know that's been one of the issues.
There
so.
is, I mean, one of the challenges, I think, where the industry is right now is we make estimates for what traffic is going to do, and we'll make plans for what traffic's going to do, but we won't accept estimates for what we think that Bike and Transit are going to do,
Yeah.
and make plans and build projects for those. And so hopefully we can make a step forward to this now that we have some additional tools to bring to bear. So let me speak, to some of the potential outcomes. We are committed. ADOT's the standard. We're going to, set things in motion, compliant with ADOT standards. But we do anticipate that it's like, well, there may be differences with ADOT standards and what the city would like to see, or ADOT standards and what Mountain Line would like to see. And we will lay out some alternatives for addressing those. And the range that we've identified, well, that the very extreme end then is a route transfer. But there are, things like management agreements. I mean, right now, it's still ADOT policy. If you're going to have a bike lane on an ADOT highway and you're willing to stripe it and mark it and sign it and maintain it, you can have a bike lane on an ADOT facility. And so there's those kind of management agreements. The city already manages sidewalks, manages lighting, things like that.
Myrna has her hand up.
And then just a couple more things, and we'll get to you. Then, there are variances, and there is, probably even bigger than a route transfer or on the same scale is, are there best practices out there that we've come across that says, there's maybe, justifiable reason to request a policy change at ADOT, and then how might one make that happen? But at the end, we're still going to have a plan that's compliant with current policy and lay out alternatives for other solutions. So, Myrna?
Just to expand a little bit on what Anne was asking, I believe within, determining access points on an ADOT facility is considered a planning activity. So I believe that is included. And then in terms of standards, I was wondering, does Coconino County have a standard? And I would, if they do, I think that their standards also needs to be included in the study. And I think we also need to like prioritize, which standard is to be followed if there's a contradiction between 2 or 3.
Thank you. That's another excellent point. You're on a roll today, Myrna. So here's the schedule. It's roughly a 2-year schedule. We'll make better time if we can. That said, we know that there are things like a small staff managing this project, and so if anybody takes a break or has a issue, that's going to be a significant disruption. We're working with NAU and with some new software that we're trying to acquire. So there's going to be a learning curve there. We're hoping to get that in place so that they're learning this fall semester, and then come spring, we're really up and running. In the meantime, we're doing the modeling, prior to that micro simulation work they would do. So we're hopefully that this 2-year process gives us some slack, and that we're able to accelerate it or expedite it. Just kind of a flashback to part of the discussion last month. Really looking for this idea of consensus with a unanimous support. There's an escalation process that will be developed. And so if we don't reach consensus and feel that we need to move into an escalation process, we'll do that. And hopefully through that, we can reach consensus. And there may be some things that fall back to a majority vote if we need to, just to move forward. But that will be our strongest. Trying to reach consensus will be our goal. Mentioned earlier that we're going to have a project advisory group. And so not to be confused with the PEMA Association of Governments. They will be directed to and advise staff, and then we'll be bringing that information up through the TAC. Executive, or the membership of that PAG has not been determined, but do anticipate several TAC members serving on that. And if we end up with a quorum of TAC members, which is a possibility, we'll just post those meetings accordingly. And I believe, this again, part of the conversation we are trying to head towards this quarterly meeting with project advisory group meetings in between. I think we're still heading in that direction. King wants to float that by the board before she spends a lot of time hammering that out. So what's coming up? We're going to create this project advisory group. We're going to work with them and the TAC to hammer out this escalation process and start getting the communications rolling. As you can see, we're already starting to pull some of the existing conditions together. We have some model training coming up, so hopefully we're adept or at least competent at using our new model, and we'll start that ball rolling. So anybody have any qualms about us kind of going full steam ahead on this? Well, if there's any, I didn't hear any changes that people would suggest to any of the goals, objectives, or deliverables. And so unless there's objection or corrections at this point, we'll get moving ahead. Any concerns?
Sorry, maybe was there cost estimation as far as the implementation of plan
Yes,
project?
yes,
Okay,
it would be.
thank you. That was, I think, one of
Yeah, one of the questions too, is we probably won't do the developer share, or proportional share. I don't know.
just a high level cost.
Yeah, high level costs,
then-
and we might be able to look at the segments that we have and say, well, this much demand is coming from this segment, this segment, this segment through various projects. It just as a means of kind of, again, mimicking the TIA process. And maybe when we talk about developments that are coming up, they fall in this area, are these reasonable expectations? I think it will just help in terms of those conversations. Okay. Nandia, anything that you care to add, or questions that you might have with the group?
No, it's been a really great conversation so far, and I really appreciate everybody's help forming this planning process. I know it's taken us a little while to get to this point, but we're super excited to get working on it. And My apologies for not being there today and able to present due to a medical issue. And I guess just lastly, thank you to both Dave and Ty for being there and covering me on this project. But we'll have more for you at the next meeting for sure.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll, I think we'll come back and look to formally tie this up in August, but at least, for the time being, we'll be acting as if we've got a bright green light, so. All right. Madam Chair.
Okay. We will move on to item B, happening at MetroPlan.
Yeah,
I'm
so
assuming you're gonna be acting as Sandra.
I'm going to be acting as Sandra. I'm just, that's all my cultural references are just so dated. It's like civil with multiple personalities. Nobody knows what that is.
I do.
Thank you. So, this has been on people's radar for a while. The Transportation Alternatives Program, that project submission is due the 29th, but there is a early submittal if you want to get the benefit of an ADOT review. So one of the concepts that's out there, everything that we've received so far has a school component to it. There's a couple of capital projects at Knowles for the city of Flagstaff, at Cromer for the county, and that would be safe routes to school projects. The county health district, I think, would also like to reinstitute the safe routes to school program. So it would be a programmatic activity. And as you see on the screen here, Mountain Line would like a planning grant for looking at this left turn off of Gemini onto Cedar. So at the west end of Gemini, which makes the loop, right now it's only a right in, right out. And the bus has to come all the way to basis, drop the kids off, go all the way back out to the east end, and then proceed west. And there's my understanding, I haven't seen the proposal, but Flagstaff Junior Academy is looking to locate up on the mesa. So that'll create even more demand for that trip. And this would introduce a lot of efficiency for them. So again, I'll have the safe route to school connection. And one concept would be, let's all put it together. This is safe routes to school, Flagstaff region. And really kind of kicking off or resurrecting that whole notion and focus. So to that aspect, Sandra will be sending out an invitation to all parties involved, just to bring them up to date on the tech program and to talk about this concept and move forward. So any questions on the TAP program or comments?
It's a great strategy to package that as potentially, but different types of projects all around the narrative around education, access, equity, school, community building. So I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, it's one of those maybe strength in numbers, but it's also an all or nothing approach. Yeah. So just maybe a couple other items before we wrap up. We're continuing to work with the county on the Protect grant for 89. I think it's coming along fairly well. Sandra's, just want to give kudos to Sandra, somebody who is not well versed in either flood control or transportation. Really learning a lot fast and finding just really incredible resources and charming people into getting all the information she needs. So I think it's going to be a pretty strong application, and we'll see how that goes. And also we got our grant agreement for the Safe Streets and Roads for All planning grant. That's signed. And so now I have to start working on that.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
And I guess the last thing I will say, we'll have this on the August TAC agenda, but an update on the regional transportation safety plan. A lot of good online tools are really coming into focus, and look forward to scheduling time with individual agencies. I've talked with David Lemke about coordinating with the city, for instance, to kind of to actually sit down and walk, not just say, here's how to use the tool, but actually look at the results of those tools, network screening, and seeing are we, seeing what we ought to see, are we seeing the right things, where do they see issues, and we also have a survey out to TAC members. And thank you to those who have completed it. Would encourage the rest of you to survey Meki Tool. You should have gotten a link to that. You can get that done. We'll bring those results back to you and hopefully wrap up our emphasis areas. The consultant is starting to work up strategies for those. And if we can, it's like, it just kept growing. It's like, yeah, you ought to look at this. It's like, if we can shrink that down to a more manageable number, I think that'll help our plan be a little more interesting. So that's what's happening at MetroPlan. So
Not a small list.
about as- here we are closing business. Madam Chair.
All right, I think we have no items from the committee. We'll
There's-
go past that.
Yeah, well, this is actually, if there's,
Okay.
this is an opportunity to let us know if there's agenda items coming up or activities of which we should all be aware.
I've got one. So, there's a lot of grants out there right now, and that, we don't have the capability to jump on them because they're due in such a, 6-8 weeks, they're due. So I had asked Stacy BK, our grants and contracts manager, about a solicitation for on-call grant writing. And she said, oh, we did that last year, but we never finalized the process. So the city actually did a request for statement of qualifications last spring, got submittals back, but never went through the scoring and selection process. So I'm working right now with our procurement department, and it sounds like we can just like reboot that process where they left off, because it's a qualifications-based selection, and it included, grant application, grant writing, and then also, if awarded the project, working for all the reports and tracking.
So it's management too. not
Yeah.
just writing.
So,
That's huge.
so we're looking to get that going. So more to come on that. And actually, what kind of brought it up is we wanted to go after Protect Grant
Mhm.
for Spruce Wash. And I talked with Kate. She said, oh, we're already doing it for the county.
Yeah.
So they didn't have the capacity. Our on-call people didn't have the capacity. So then I was like, we gotta get on this. So
So Madam,
hopefully there's, better opportunities, and, some of these come out annually. And if we know we want to go after something, we can start writing the application and get it to the point. So the next year when it comes out, we're 50% done. And we can just jump on it even quicker.
Is it gonna be an on-call service to all divisions or just, because there's a lot of planning grants that keep coming out. And we would love to go after
It's a
them. but-
good question. I don't know how they wrote it.
Okay,
If it was just for, I think it's for, because I think they would use it for airport stuff.
Yeah.
And transportation and stormwater.
that's huge.
Just, yeah.
Otherwise, we're gonna be bugging you guys.
so just to add on to what Paul just said, Madam Chair. So one of the things that Sandra is tasked with is to really help us be proactive and working together. Say, what are the grants opportunities out there? What do we, we've got 3 more years of this cycle. What are our priorities to help get us right to that point? And, think strategically as a region, so we're not necessarily competing with ourselves unless we have, it's like now we really think this is a situation where they're both very important projects, both very urgent. And so we need, we need to.
And we had looked at doing the Protect Grant in-house, but then we didn't want to compete against the county.
Mhm.
So
So appreciate that. No, that's exciting because there is a lot of money out there and
So I mean, there's lots of money out there.
as opposed to you gotta pay to play, you gotta play to get paid.
But those NOFOs come out and it's like 6 weeks and we're just shaking our heads like,
Yeah,
It's great.
okay.
I have another item. I have reached out to Sarah to see if she can give me time on that one. But I would like to invite, at least Sarah Decker to our next meeting, to just give an update on the business as usual. It's gonna start, we will be going out to the next technical advisory group, I think in September, or very soon, but I think that this group will be very interested in kind of what the findings are.
Yeah.
I did miss the last meeting due to a scheduling conflict, but we did submit for the safe streets for all for the Butler projected intersections and the raised bike lanes.
That's exciting.
And yeah, so hopefully we're back in December on that.
I don't know if when TAC, I can't remember when TAC met last and we outlined, got essentially a $16 million federal value, but it's basically a $20 million total, the local match for our maintenance facility at Caspar, which is exciting for Mountain Line. So we're really, speaking of, we were pleasantly surprised to get that because that was a nationally competitive grant to get the whole thing. So your planning team I will be reaching out with my consultant to we're starting on design already. So we'll be ready to kick that off.
Great.
I think one other thing I'd like to update the group on is we have, I think I've talked to all of you about the land availability, suitability, and project and code analysis. So we did just get that under contract with Dow, and then they are subbing with Cascadia, which is really great just because of their involvement in the scenario planning.
Who's the firm?
It's Dow, DOWL. They're full disclosure, it's actually a firm that I work with in Anchorage. It's their Portland office that actually came after it, and they were the selected winner. But so the land availability suitability is really looking at, kind of all of our land base, but really with a focus of residential and sustainability. But kind of understanding where we can compile different pieces, where our infrastructure gaps are, what is the viability of even some regional cost share. So I think there's gonna be a lot of information that comes out of that part. That'll be really interesting for this group. It may even be something that we come to this group and ask for feedback on. So just a heads up. And then there's the full code analysis, and that's all development code. And we are partnering with Mountain Line as well. So they were able to get a grant. We're in the process of doing an IGA with them so that we can really do a more robust than what we had in our scope to look at the transit component of that. But it's going to look at engineering, standard zoning, building, fire, et cetera, and including our processes, which includes the TIA process. But it's a pretty beefy scope, and it's super exciting and super terrifying because it is huge and it's going to be under the microscope. But really, I think it's, I'm super excited about it. One, not just because of the deliverable that is going to come out of it, but I think it's starting to open up the forum to have really good coordination between all sections within the city, but also our partners in a really meaningful way. And I will be honest, like the focus of it is really, the business as usual model is showing us that we have got to change our ways, and we have to do it in a significant way. We can't keep just cranking the dial a little bit and kind of be PC about the changes we're making. So we're really hoping to have full data to support major changes. And so I think this could be a huge catalyst to really implementing what we've heard about the big shifts. So it's exciting. And I think this group is going to be pulled in different ways. So.
Well, and I think this, having Cascadia involved really does give us a lot of opportunity, I think, with the West Route 66 study to kind of look at that TIA process. And there may be an opportunity, you know, if there's a project coming online, to maybe do a shadow TIA process to say, what would you do differently? And then maybe actually test some of those things. That's exciting.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Next meeting, Madam Chair, is August 23rd.
Okay.
Do we have to bring, was it RTAC?
For the RTAC project?
Yeah, do we have to bring those to the next meeting?
I believe that's right.
The-
We'll make sure that,
Yeah, just send out a reminder.
yeah, and I think we've gotten a list from you guys. But
Okay, I didn't know if we got
expect- yeah,
sent.
Chris Fair sent that.
Okay, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
But it's still early days.
Yep.
And things change, so we'll kind of maybe confirm that list.
It should be good.
Yeah.
I didn't know you had sent it.
Okay. Okay. With that, it's 2:44 and we can adjourn.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Well,
See if I stop sharing.
I looked up that whole spice thing in here. It's not spicy at all, even when you go into the technical page.